Ano ang espesipikong anyo ng Florante at Laura? Metrical romance. Ano ang kulay ng buhok ni Florante? Ginto. Saang puno siya nakagapos? Sa puno ng higuera. All these years, the joke was, nasa hagdan pa lang ng Costa si Soledad Reyes, nagbibigay na ng quiz. Kaya pagpasok niya sa pinto ng classroom, question number 5 na ang dapat sagutin. Whether through smartly constructed daily quizzes or her comprehensively styled killer long tests, Ma'am Sol would challenge any student's reading progress and sense of insight. Those who were too lazy to read simply drowned. There was no room for glib charlatanism or contrived nationalism. One fostered the love and the literary acumen only by reading, honestly reading. But Ma'am Sol probed literary texts using a method of rigorous critical analysis. In her classes, she argued passionately for the importance of context, locating the work in history, identifying how it comes to the defense of Philippine culture. She fostered a comparative perspective so that, for example, to understand mga agos sa disyerto, one must also pay attention to what the realism of Dreiser, Steinbeck, and Faulkner had achieved for American fiction. Ma'am Sol witnessed the exact moment when new criticism went out of fashion. But I never heard her say, form doesn't matter. Instead, her critical practice would ask without tiring, how have historical forces affected the literary scene? What powers struggle in the political arena direct the nature of literary expression? How do the senses of history, nation, class, and gender figure in the imaginative writing that our writers are advancing today? Around 1989, she left the English department to venture into program administration as chair of the Filipino department. She willed herself to continue the work left by her mentors, future national artists Rolando Pino and Bienvenido Lumbera. Before Ma'am Sol came in, the Filipino department was an enclave of 5 mid-rank teachers. When she took office, we doubled in number right away. Although most of her new recruits took time in deciding whether they would really go full-time teaching. Frankly, at the start of her term, Ma'am Sol had perhaps shocked Xavier Hall with her request for an additional 15 plantilla position items. No one felt ready to entertain her statistical wager that the department could expand that dramatically. During that day's departmental meeting, we ourselves balked at her staggering proposition. Paano nga tayo uunlad kung hindi maglalakas loob na tutukan ang expansion ng kagawaran? She turned to us with a glare. One eyebrow raised emphatically. Moreover, she stressed, in categorical terms, I told Tati Licuanan and Leo Garcia that I would fight tooth and nail to get those 15 items. I wasn't sold about the toothy, white-fanged part of her threat, but the unmistakable image of long painted fingernails, vividly painted and poised to claw, tear, and ravage, like Amado Hernandez's birds of prey in mga igong mandaragit, was more than enough to convince me that Ma'am Sol would prevail in securing those tenure position items. Under her watch, Ma'am Sol embodied departmental administration as avid work for cultural intervention. To carry this out, she assembled a teaching staff of young people, creating the profile of energetic and imaginative Filipino teachers, knowledgeable beyond grammar and language drills. She oriented us into the clear profile of students who would be signing up for our courses. Most of them were the children of upper middle class families, quite often with an unexamined condescension toward Philippine culture. It did not help that most of the enrollees were academically undernourished in high school, force-fed on a diet high on balarila, but deficient in the history of Philippine ideas. From a distance, Ma'am Sol could tell that many of these students led sheltered lives, vastly unfamiliar with the struggles of the great and washed. The humanist in Ma'am Sol trusted that we could make a dent on such young minds. Her marching order was for us to cut down on the classroom antics and simply demonstrate the gravitas and power which our own literature possessed. Thus, like Jerry Respeto, the teachers whom Ma'am Sol chose to staff the department also evolved as undistracted cultural workers, engaged in the creation of activities that would speak to this quaint demography of students, enticing them to read, love, and respect Philippine literature, history, and culture. As chair, Ma'am Sol also made way for those famous lunches, the Filipino Departments to Die For begin, where the senior teachers themselves lavished the dinner table with their own delectable concoctions. She believed that a hearty meal was the most effective way of gaining support for research and cultural projects from Ateneo's administrators. Why not, when there was a humane philosophy behind the method? Earnestly, the best way of securing the cultural agenda was to explore it with good food on the side, prompting wit, laughter, and the gradual revelation of one's steady passion for things Philippine along the way. Soon enough, we felt at home sharing a meal with the university president, Dr. Stati Lukwanan and Leo Garcia, Father Mario Francisco, Chita Rosales, the late Esther Pacheco, and Shane Lumbera, Karen Cardenas, and the many other intellectual forces of the university who would drop by and lunch at the Filipino department. In Baliktanaw, Ma'am Sol's critical autobiography, intervention is the word which she uses repeatedly to narrate how she responded to the call of the times and the challenges of her career. To intervene is to present oneself boldly in a situation, often involving some significant turning point, wholeheartedly bringing into it one's capacities with a deliberate wish to alter the results of that event. In Ma'am Sol's case, the situation meant the university's will to integrate the importance of Philippine culture in the intellectual formation of its students and in adding uplifting patriotic nuances to its daily operations. As for the capacities, they pointed to Ma'am Sol's personal resolve to direct the contentions of the Filipino department and to recruit the crucial human resources and craft the programs that would bolster the cultural agenda. Right this moment, I believe that for the School of Humanities, the seasons ahead should include a thoughtful assessment of Ma'am Sol's legacies in teaching and administration. In her critical autobiography, she portrays these chapters of her life with deliberate restraint. It is understandable. For in these areas of contention, what indeed are the measurable gauges that one could use in quantifying the dent which cultural leadership leaves behind? Knowing Ma'am Sol, she is also not one to insist on such self-aggrandizing claims. Rightfully, this act of reckoning is the task of younger colleagues whom she has worked with and the students whom she taught. Perhaps the matter of pedagogical legacy doesn't flatter her at all, but that should not deter us today. The university stands to benefit from such a critical reckoning. This useful exercise will enrich the university's intellectual development and ascertain the next phase of cultural contention that it can rightfully take. As a thinker, Ma'am Sol has worn her class background with pride. Right away, she makes you aware of her middle-class persuasion as a scholar engaged in producing knowledge. This has led her scholarship to defend the artistic preoccupations of the middle class through the Tagalog novel, the pelikulang Filipino, and endless teleseries of popular following, the comics, and those fanatical energies catapulting the likes of Nora Honor, Fernando Poe Jr., and Joseph Estrada into various platforms of power. Her criticism reminds us that middle-class expression has its own respectable command of beauty and function, of sense and meaning, that one cannot dismiss or trash as kitsch. For me, her frank reckoning is even more admirable. The middle-class minds who sweat and labor to produce knowledge can never escape those wars linked to class placement and their ensuing intriguing power play. Ma'am Sol experienced this truth as a teacher and as a young critic whose interventions were bound to be belittled now and then. Who could ever forget her anecdote about being rejected in her bid for academic promotion? When I climbed up Xavier Hall for my appointment, the president told me that I would have to try again because I still needed seasoning. I was taken aback by the suggestion. Ano ako, sinigang? During that time, the controversial fortune teller, who was Madame Auring, had yet to receive her break in popular stardom. So, I had no idea that the right and encouraging retort should have been, sige lang, Ma'am Sol. Ngayon talaga ang tamang panahon para magmaasim ka. As a mentor, Ma'am Sol was fair and forthright. She offered watchful encouragement to the procession of young writers in our department. Jim Paje, the late poets Loretta Medina and Randy Bustamante, Danton Remoto, Jim Agustin, Noel Del Prado, and myself. In our own fevered attempts at writing, she used to knock sense into our dreamy heads by saying, Danton and DM, remember that writing in English is just a tributary of the grand river that is Philippine writing. In moments of crisis, Ma'am Sol would refuse to be lured into fruitless griping or to dwell in puny tirades and barbed remarks. She preferred to respond head-on, finding a way to define her standpoint, pointing out what the power games were either denying or suppressing, and quietly deciding to soldier on, creating the platform that would empower her rank to proceed and to do so fairly. After Ma'am Sol moved to the Interdisciplinary Studies department, someone told me that she voiced some hurt over some of her previous efforts at the Filipino department being carelessly tossed away. I could not really tell to what extent this feeling had consumed her because she continued to smile, returning my greeting with a wave or a nod whenever I would run into her. But one afternoon, I summoned enough courage to see her at the IS department. I went to her room and asked, Ma'am Sol, masama ba ang loob mo sa akin? She paused from her computer work, looked at me, and said gently, halika nga dito, maupo ka, mag-usap tayo. It was a calm conversation filled with candor and an objective look at the issue. It was brief, precise, and disappointingly undramatic. Di tulad sa mga kabanata ng nobelang Tagalog, hindi niya sinampal, sinabunutan, ininudngod sa sahig at binawian ng mana ang talipandas na anak. Instead, in vintage Soledad fashions, she simply said, I appreciate your coming to see me today. Alam mo naman ako, hindi ako nagtatanim ng galit. What you see is what you get. Alam ko po, ma'am, I replied. Kaya nilakasan ko ang loob na makipagkita sa inyo. After that short heart-to-heart, as it were, Ma'am Sol and I went to work on a number of big projects, including her providing the vision for the sesquicentennial cultural celebration and the Brindis Gala commemorating 150 years of Jose Rizal. In turn, I assisted her in her non-stop annual or biannual book launchings occasionally finding the time to even send her my homemade fruit salad. Ma'am Sol never harped again on that erstwhile moment of mentorly tension or parental tampuhan perhaps. In my own career, whenever I would feel beleaguered by conflict at work, tempted to give in to festering resentments or to shoot back by doing something mean, I would return to how my first boss grappled with such trying moments. I would run through Ma'am Sol's tried and tested strategies, focus on the point in contention, articulate your principled stand, argue why things should be done in a certain way, cite historical precedents, and whether you lose or win the argument, don't take it personally. Soldier on. Keep whatever friendship remains, but carry on with your conviction in your own quiet way. In this last half of my tell-all tribute, let me talk about Soledad Reyes, the critic. The woman of the hour read some 300 Tagalog novels. This is the critic who brings to light the true gold that this nation owns through Macario Pineda's Ginto sa Makiling. Happily today, the family of Macario Pineda is represented in her midst. This is the woman who argues that Kenkoy and comics, Tony Velasquez and Francisco Coching are worth our cultural reflection and pride. The articulate critic who speaks with conviction about the prowess of literary women, from Lina Flor to Rosario de Guzman Lingat. First, hers is a scholarship whose heart beats for the nation. Consider how in the last 50 years alone, Pinoy political arena has basked in performing a restless moro-moro of shifting loyalties, where upholding national interest is at stake. And in the field of critical theory too, critics have flaunted bewildering jargon drawn from cultural materialism, narratology, mesology, trauma studies, visual culture, and eco-criticism, wielding intimidating concepts to warn most of us that we are too dumb to partake in the discursive exchange. Ma'am Sol was never taken by erudition. She preferred a no-nonsense approach, valuing clear-sighted application in making sense of the stark cultural realities vexing us daily. Aside from foregrounding the literary importance of Rosario de Guzman Lingat, Lina Flor, Liwayway Arceo, and a host of other female writers, Ma'am Sol has worked with Edna Zapanta-Manlapaz and Patricia Benitez Licuanan to establish the Ateneo Library of Women's Writing. To this very moment, Philippine literary history holds a grudging place for a limited number of female critics. Of them all, the one who commands definitive prominence is Soledad S. Reyes. As the SLU Publishing House Director David Jonathan Byte suggested, on the national level, there ought to be unqualified recognition for Soledad S. Reyes on account of her remarkable contribution to Philippine cultural studies and criticism. And as important in her critical practice, Ma'am Sol has tried to present a convincing portrait of the Filipino as reader, ang masa bilang mambabasa. She was drawn to this reader's proficiency in Tagalog, later on in Filipino, and its mass-oriented sensibility. She didn't find it demeaning that the masa readers were of limited economic means. More than anything, she was intrigued by their literary virtues. These were readers who trusted our language, refusing to betray it in favor of English. In concrete, they read steadily and avidly the literature being produced in the national language. It did not escape her attention that these readers would set aside money to subscribe to or rent printed materials featuring literary text. Simple as they were, they too had a reading habit, and one that demonstrated an undeniable concern for culture and history. In their own way, these readers were boldly taking part in the wider quest for nationhood. Some of them had heroism in their blood, having participated in significant collective exercises, from joining the revolution against Spain to guerrilla work to electing leaders in power and then bringing them down through people power in a fervid do-or-die quest for the nation's freedom with staunch pride in their being Filipino. In May 2022, when an apparent 31 million voters catapulted a disgraced Marcos back into the presidency, I wanted to find out where the nation of readers, this nation of readers, had gone. With deep-seated frustration, I asked, where did these conscientious Filipinos go, and how could they turn away from their moral obligation right now? Yet instinctively, what consoled me was the thought that this readership profile sketched by Ma'am Sol was the reason for my stubborn doubt that the COMELEC's 31 million was more likely a suspicious form of statistical fiction. Ma'am Sol's unheralded country of discerning readers compels me to continue being curious about the hidden machinations resulting in computer-tampered votes and corruption rendered today in the guise of rapid information technology. Like Ma'am Sol, I can only hope that one day, these readers will show up at history's front lines again to assert their clear grasp of reality, breaking the silence, making their principled presence felt. For me, the persistent comfort of Soledad Reyes' critical practice lies in her assertion that it is only through this literary devotion to reading that the collective heart and mind of our country will possibly transform. Through the uncelebrated readers who buy, read, and live out the compelling truth told by our writers, she has already identified for us the forces who will make the change happen. I consider literary translation as the logical conclusion of Ma'am Sol's storied career. Looking back, she waged a lifetime for grounding fiction in Filipino, which the literary mainstream had consigned to the margins. She pursued this unpopular office as a well-read English major with a clear, discerning sense of the strengths which some of our untranslated heritage possessed, without barring comparison with the literary gems of the world. And because Ma'am Sol is never daunted, it seems only logical that she should appeal to the greater world to take a look at the writing that had stirred her own heart and mind. In previous launchings, Ma'am Sol had already highlighted through translation the compelling vision of Macario Pineda, Servando de los Angeles, Liwayway Arceo, Patricio Mariano, and most recently, Precioso Palma. Right this moment, the gesture of translation as offering to the greater world sees her presenting more stories of the bright star who is Rosario de Guzman Lingat. 2 weeks ago, during her grand launch at Essex University, Ma'am Sol talked publicly for the first time about her battle with illness and the ravages of an aggressive clinical treatment. All heart, she thanked the doctors who attended to her, disclosing her own struggle to lift up her heart, to dwell on a poetics of hope in the face of old mortality. Hobbled by recurring weakness, she hinted at the possibility of showing up on a wheelchair today and fulfilled it. But not even such obstacles could keep her from coming here to present yet sweeter fruits of her intellectual labor. Beyond symbol hunting, let us delight in the thought that we are launching her latest book on the 22nd of March, and as the Western calendar rightly heralds, the much anticipated end of winter, the first day of spring. Let me end on a more light-hearted note with an amusing anecdote from one summer afternoon, warm and bright as what brings us together today. Ma'am Sol was heading back to the old De La Costa building from her class. In counterflow, I was headed to the cafeteria, craving to buy halo-halo when she stopped me on my tracks. She looked around, making sure that no one else was watching us. Then she said in a hushed, conspiratorial way, "You have to see this." And from out of the blue, her hand dug into her bosom, fishing out an unbroken piece of chalk. Trying not to laugh out loud, I asked, "Ma'am, bakit may magic act ng kasama sa teaching techniques mo ngayon? Ito na ba ang bagong requirement para sa student-centered learning?" She leaned back, moving her head confidently a la Dorothy Parker, and said, "Alam mo naman, I cannot keep still in front of a class. But as I was explaining a point, the chalk slipped from my grip and glided in there, pointing to her cleavage. Unfortunately, it got stuck. No matter how I moved and wriggled, it refused to slip away. Hindi ko naman madukot in front of all those students, so tiniis ko na lang. Mabuti nga nasa lubong kita para matanggal ko na siya." This from the woman who often lectured how the forces of literature and history often collided in rigorous oscillation. Well, the critical concepts that Soledad S. Reyes could illustrate with her body and her body of works. I remember Mary Rosellis taking pride in surprising people with the delightful story that Vladimir Nabokov was her high school teacher. The late Ma'am Edith Tiempo often recounted her tapping the knee of Robert Frost in a poetry reading to ask why he had to repeat the closing lines of Stopping by Woods on a snowy evening. As for me, I will gloat forever recounting my Sol Reyes chalk talk story and how hope springs eternal from the human breast. Seriously, I will always speak with pride and affection for Dr. Soledad S. Reyes. And on parting terms that can never be excessive for a personal tribute, beyond the deep gratitude, let me end by saying, mahal kita, Ma'am Sol, tulad ng walang patid at mabungang pagsasakit mo para sa ating kultura at panitikan, hari nawang lumawig pa ang iyong buhay. Mahal ka naming lahat na naririto ngayon. Let us give our unreserved applause for the woman of the hour.